Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about the Empire in Total War Warhammer 3. Out of the races in the game, I think the Empire is the most versatile race that you can play, or one of the most versatile races that you can play, because you have a good combination of units to deal with pretty much every situation, regardless of the foe that you're tackling. And that is not something many races have, because some races are really good with infantry, some races are really good with range units or range gunpowder units. The Empire is pretty solid in quite a few respects. They do have their strengths, in particular in artillery and cavalry, land-based cavalry, but they're kind of universal. The one weakness they do have is with regards to flying units. They have flying heroes, they have flying lords, but they don't have flying units, a flying unit roster. And that is the one weakness they do have, because flying units give you a lot of flexibility on the campaign map, can deal with artillery units in particular, controlled by the AI in a far more effective fashion. However, given the fact that you have some of the best artillery in the game, that isn't necessarily the biggest problem. Besides, your heroes, in particular your mages, can handle that as well. So, you have solid enough infantry. Not the best infantry in the game, but spearmen with shields are pretty solid line holders, so are halberdiers. And then at a higher tier, you do have great swords. Not the best infantry in it, but certainly can get the job done. And then of course you have the electric count state troopers, including the Caribou great swords, which have extra melee attack and leadership. They won't be winning against exalted bloodletters, but they can get the job done in most situations. And, Eldred's Guard are some of the best line holders in the game, and that is not necessarily an exaggeration. Sure, there are better ones, but in terms of, considering the unit tier, because this is effectively kind of like a tier 2 unit, it may take you a while to get a lot of them, but not many races can say that they have a unit that's this cheap and this effective. Limited quantities, however, with regards to that. Beyond that, you have a great selection of lords and heroes. Generals of the Empire are good army leaders because they have a skill line that helps them with that. Master engineers are really good range leaders. So, the generals of the Empire are generalists. The master engineer is more focused on range units and artillery because you have a choice of a skill line over here. Generally, I would go with Ballistics Instructor, because this improves your range, gives you ballistic calibration, so reload skill, casualty replenishment for Empire artillery and war machine units, and restock cooldown and number of ability uses. So you start with restock by default with Master Engineer. This just gives you more. Or you can go for improving his own combat ability. You can improve his own combat ability with the Pigeon Bomb skill. Personally, I generally don't do that, but it is something you can have available. Then you have Archlectors. Archlectors are a land-based lord. So, generals can get a flying mount. Master engineers can get a steam tank. Pretty solid. Archlectors, they don't have either of those, they just have a horse, but because of their skill line, the skills that they do have, including Grand Soulfire and Grand Shield of Faith, they can reduce the damage they take by quite a lot, and they can allow themselves to be surrounded by enemy units and do a significant amount of damage. And this is not a spell in the sense that it consumes winds of magic. This is an ability. So you can make an army of led by an Archlector with a bunch of warrior priests that is crazy effective, especially against a lot of stacks of cheap units. Huntsman General more focused on range combat ability, so it's kind of hit or miss with these guys, but they can be useful in situations. Then you have the hero selection. So you can get every hero of the Empire at tier 2, be it witch hunters, warrior priests, engineers, mages. Now, mages can only be acquired from a provincial capital, so if I just were to say take a minor settlement over here in this campaign as Elspeth, just doing that very, very quickly. some auto-resolve nonsense over there. Yeah, just take over this element. If we look at the situation with buildings, you can see that we can get warrior, priest, witch hunters, imperial captains, but we can't get mage capacity for that. So mages are the main limiting factor. However, you don't need mages as much as you might need other heroes. The reason is, usually I would say there's not necessarily that many reasons to have more than one mage per army when you can get to other combat units. You do have a finite amount of winds of magic in a campaign. But given the way the Empire itself is designed, and the fact that Karl Franz, Elspeth, and Gelt, who are really the only Imperial campaigns worth playing at the moment, they're all dealing with the Empire, you can actually get a good amount of mages just for the Empire alone. Lots of provinces equals lots of mages. Beyond that, Gelt has infinite mages, and Elspeth has a huge capacity of mages, so really it's not an issue. Karl Franz may have more limitations on that front, but he's not really going to struggle. And the fact that you can get these heroes at tier 2 gives you a lot of campaign flexibility right out of the gate. Because you can get a replenishment hero very, very quickly. You can get a hero with scavenge very quickly. You can get a melee hero quickly. You can get an engineer for campaign movement range and other range benefits in a campaign quickly. That is all very, very good. Beyond that, you also have access to a good amount of units early on. So you can get artillery, cannons in particular, and you can get mortars early on. Funnily enough, mortars historically were good in sieges, but in the game, not necessarily so much. But you can get cannons to, well, obviously mortars were never meant to deal with walls, whereas cannons are meant to deal with walls. So cannons are good anti-large, even though they don't have an anti-large benefit, but really they're meant to hit big targets. So big single entities or walls or towers, really good on that. Mortars more designed for clumps of units. And then you cap it off with Hellstorm rocket batteries, Hellblaster volley guns, steam tanks, and land ships. Truthfully, I generally don't use steam tanks in a campaign, with the exception of some Electrocount state troopers. It would be nice to use, volley gun steam tanks more often, but yeah, the tier requirement is pretty high. In terms of magic, you do have Luminarch of Hysh, so it's interesting to think about the Luminarch. Luminarchs were pretty crap for most of their existence in Total War Warhammer, but Creative Assembly did fix them, and now they might have some moments when they still derp out, but they also have moments when they do significant levels of damage against enemy lords, enemy heroes, and generally big units. Like, really big units. Not necessarily a great siege unit, but, you're not going to do wrong bringing a Luminarch in a battle, I would dare say. In terms of the cavalry aspect, you have a good selection of cavalry. So you have Imperial Knights at tier 2. This is actually better than Bretonnia, which is, yes, as ridiculous as it sounds, because Bretonnia doesn't get real cavalry until they're tier 3. You start with Imperial Knights, which can compete with Knights of the Realm that Bretonnia has. Like, Bretonnia has better cavalry, sure, and they have flying cavalry, which gives them a significant level of flexibility, but it's very high tier. Whereas Empire gets a really solid cavalry unit at tier 2. That is actually an exceptional level of cavalry power. And then when you look at tier 3, you look at Reichsguard, which is a good shock cavalry, or Knights of the Blazing Sun, which in some ways are better, some ways are worse. Like, they have less armor, but they have a higher charge bonus in combat, and they have flaming attacks and spell resistance, so pretty solid unit in a lot of ways. And Knights of the Blazing Sun, Knights of the Black Rose, rather, for the sake of melee cavalry, stand and fight type cavalry. Like, basically, at tier 3, you're getting a roughly equivalent to what Bretonnia has, but you have a much better tier 2 situation, I would say. And then tier 4, you get Demigryphs, pretty solid unit, either an anti-large benefit with halberds, or an anti-infantry benefit with the regular ones. I personally would bother with the halberds. Depends on what you're dealing with. Like, the better charge unit are the regular Demigryph Knights, but you probably want the halberd one if you're dealing with a bunch of enemy cavalry. Depends on what you're dealing with. And again, this is the main benefit that you have in an Imperial campaign, it is that flexibility. Like if you're dealing with the vampire counts, you may want to have a bunch of anti-large, because anti-large on cav is basically an anti-cav benefit. That is useful. Or if you're dealing with swarms of infantry but no cavalry, you may want, armor piercing and regular stats, or as much of a charge bonus. Depends on what you're dealing with. Where ranged units, you again have that kind of same flexibility. If you're fighting in a portion of the campaign map where the terrain might not be suitable for the sake of gunpowder units, which generally are more powerful, you can go crossbowmen and with huntsmen. Huntsmen in particular have firing while moving, vanguard deployment, so they can do quite a bit of damage, especially with their stock ability. They lack snipe, that is a downside, but they do have a good amount of range combat ability. And then, of course, you have gunpowder units. So one of the more powerful units you have are actually pistoliers and outriders. So the reason these guys are great, funnily enough, historically speaking, during the pike and shot era, cavalry actually used pistols, not, guns like the outriders have, but pistols, including the infamous winged hussars. Like, yeah, Kislev should have pistols on their winged hussars because pretty sure the winged hussars had that as well. So you have a fast-moving cav unit that can fire while moving and do quite a bit of damage with that. Or the better version with outriders, longer range capability than the pistoliers, but fairly solid. In some ways, I think the pistoliers can do more damage from my experience, but obviously they're more vulnerable. Then you have your handgunners, null iron sides, outriders with grenade launchers. Those are dangerous. Yeah, if there's... the Empire may not have the best cavalry in the game, to be sure, but they do have a good amount of flexibility. Of course, given the nature of the game, sieges can be an issue, but you have plenty of ways of dealing with a lot of sieges. There's no siege map in the game that the Empire will struggle with, and that's fairly unique because of the artillery power you have, and the range power you have, and the magic power you have. You have plenty of options to deal with sieges. Like hell, one of the strategies you can use in sieges is get a bunch of warrior priests and arch-selectors and send them in. They'll survive and just have 4 mortar units and shoot everything that moves there, or just mass mortar units even. It will be pretty bad for a field battle, but you, again, have plenty of options for the sake of that. Then you have your economy. Your economy is decent, not the best in the world, though getting up to 500 income at tier 3, pretty solid, and you can go improve this even further with paved roads, only in major settlements though, but it's still a benefit, and also reducing global recruitment duration. Pretty solid, as well increasing campaign movement range. Rebellion's not really an issue. You have a good level of control, you have fairly solid commandments. I guess you could say that the Empire is amazing in the mediocrity of certain aspects that it does have. Like, it's or balanced, depending on how you want to use it. If there is a weakness, I would say, with the Empire, it's the research tree. So there is really useful stuff over here. To be sure, there's some strong stuff, but I just find it really uninteresting. That is what I consider the weakness. It's not that the stuff over here is bad. Increasing hero capacity, research rate, various other benefits, hero capacity and hero recruit rank, lord recruit rank, global recruitment capacity. It's all very solid. That gets the job done. But my issue with it is how long it takes to get the very useful stuff. And by the time you actually do get it, campaign is over. So I think things could have been more interesting from that perspective. But it does mean that the Empire... it can start out strong, but it gets stronger later on. In a lot of ways, the way the Empire is right now is actually what the High Elves could aspire to be, though maybe even a bit faster, because, I think the pacing of campaigns at the moment just favors that very fast rush playstyle, as opposed to, dragging on and on. I do see a lot of people playing campaigns that do drag on, and then people is like, oh, how do I deal with stacks of thunder barges? Win your campaign before anyone can recruit thunder barges. I'm just pointing it out, like, literally, if you ever end up in a campaign where someone's recruiting stacks of thunder barges or tier 5 units in general, and you're trying to fight them one-on-one with an army, you should be at a point where you outnumber them 10-1. I'm just gonna say it. Like, you may not win the campaign, but yeah, you should outnumber them by such a ridiculous degree, or your armies are so good individually in terms of hero ranks, lord crew ranks, that they overpower that. Because those are the things that matter. That's why when you're playing a campaign, it is very important to not lose heroes, to not lose units. Even if you replace those units later on, reducing casualties and keeping your army intact and veteran is actually the key to success in every campaign. The Empire can do so, but yeah, the scalability is certainly there. The power of it is absolutely there. And depending on which campaign you play, you have a ridiculous level of power. I think it's safe to say that Karl Franz, Elspeth, and Gelt are very powerful legendary lords, though not in an absurd way. They're not like Warriors of Chaos who win their campaigns on turn 1. You actually have to fight for it. I think that leaves the Empire in a fairly interesting spot as a race. They won't achieve the same ridiculous level of bullshit, really, that, Vampire Counts or Warriors of Chaos or Khorne can get to. But at the same time, they won't collapse in a way that, they won't be the miserable experience that a Vampire Coast is at the moment in a campaign. Or even the Tomb Kings. Because, people tell me, it's like, oh, the Tomb Kings are a good race. They can be, but by the time you actually make them in a good, get them in a good spot, you've won your campaign long ago. That's one of the reasons I detest the Tomb Kings. It's like, oh yeah, you can make them strong, and by turn 30, but it's like, campaign's decided within 30 turns. Everything else beyond that, for the most part, is, screwing around, more or less. It can be fun. I don't deny that. Like, I play campaign 60, 70, 100 turns sometimes, but I'm just pointing it out when it actually matters in a campaign. That is more of an inherent issue, but I think the Empire does strike a nice balance from that perspective, and that makes them a better race to play than many others. I do think the Dwarves have a better situation of it, but then again, Dwarves don't have freaking Cav, so yeah, that is one of the issues I have with them. But on the campaign map, Dwarves do certainly outmatch every other race. Just the dynamic objectives because of grudges, the Confederation of Legendary Lords, that is better with the Dwarves than every other race. But the Empire, besides Dwarves, it's certainly a top-tier contender in the Warhammer race tier list in a lot of different ways. Handles well, does well, is worth playing. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. And one final thing I've got to mention, you have a ridiculous level of schools of magic available to you with heroes that, with different schools of magic giving you different benefits for heroes, like, even schools that you might think are useless, like, for instance, Celestial Wizard versus, Gold. You might think that's not worth it, but then they increase your campaign movement range, which suddenly elevates them quite a bit. Or heroes that can summon units in combat, even if their School of Magic may not necessarily be the best. Just worth pointing out. Stay tuned.